start recording. Hi, John. Thanks so much for
Hello.
helping my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
My name is John Ryan. I am a director. I make documentaries and commercials, and I have discovered that I've always cared about space, and that it's always mattered to me. But I'm from the middle of the country, and so I never understood as a kid that it should or could matter to me in the way that it does.
When did you make that realization?
COVID. I started reading a bunch of books. One of the books that really stood out to me was Spaceport Earth by Joe Papalero. And it made me start to question everything. You know, I started looking at the X Prize and all these things that had centered around St. Louis, which of course, going back to like the whole Lindbergh flight, this city has played a pretty unique role in chartering expansion and exploration. And it just made me think differently about my own little bit, community. And I had gone to SLU. I was a pre-med kid, and I discovered at the end of my undergrad that there was a flight program. And like when I learned that, I'm like, wow, I could have been a pilot. And that kind of constant realization that, you know, like how the X Prize was being developed at the St. Louis Science Center when I was a child, and I had no idea, you know, or the fact that like the history of Boeing and McDonnell Douglas and its involvement in the space program, and all these things have happened here, but I was never aware of it, which led me to realize that there's probably a platform to help make other people aware that, you know, the exosphere matters, that what we do up there is just as important as the power lines that I'm staring at right now. So.
Well, it's kind of an interesting thing. I started this project in 2019. My plan was to go talk to people at Starbucks, on the street, at the mall. And I did all that up into the COVID lockdowns. My experience has been that unless you're a space person, there's probably less than a 1 in 5 chance of you actually knowing that we're planning to go back to the moon.
True. It's very true, and it's interesting because my business partner, who's another director, you know, we've been talking about this for years, and one day we started to hypothesize a project, and he was like, why don't you do it? And I'm like, why should I do it? I'm a kid, you know, from St. Louis. Like, what do I know about space? But that made me realize how that conversation you're talking about, the fact that like 4 to 5 people have no clue that SLS, which is rolling out right now as we speak for its wet dress rehearsal, they have no idea that these things are what they are. And people, the 4 to 5 who don't know what's happening, I think have no idea how important access to orbital existence matters now. Like, think about COVID without the infrastructure of satellites and communication platforms that exist now. That's like, I think people don't realize that we are entirely dependent on it now, you know? And the moon moves forward in that process.
I mean, yeah, definitely satellites, GPS, communication, all this. I think that's a very easy conversation to have about satellites. It becomes a little bit more difficult whenever you start talking about people. It's like,
oh yeah,
why send people?
Well, is that it's the 3 principles of exploration, why we explore. The third being because it's innate to our species. It's innate to our fabric of who we are, because we can't not ask what's under the rock. You know, the human part's crazy, right? Because you and I know that things were heading a great direction, and we took a small detour into the shuttle program, and we sat there for quite a while. It had a lot of benefit and tragedy, and tragedy brought people further away from reality, you know, the reality of what, you know, an off-planet existence looks like. But now we're back to that point, right? Why are we sending people to the moon? Why are we sending people to the moon when there's so much wrong on the planet? Why are we focusing on these things when there's so much wrong here? Is a question that I'm sure you have run into, and that I've run into, talking to the 4 out of 5 people who don't know that we're going back or care that we are. And of course, in light of recent events, right? Like, now, once again, the conversation between Roscosmos and all these different things is happening in a unique way, because the public is having to see it. They're having to be, they're aware of it in a unique way. which is fascinating to me.
Yeah. But I mean, how do you approach that conversation? Why are we sending astronauts to the moon when we have, I don't know, global climate change, poverty, healthcare issue, whatever is the topic?
I think there's two really good ways to go about it. And I think that I forget where from it comes, but it's the art of the debate brought into the idea of repeating a person's conversation, breaking down what you agree with, breaking down your discoveries, and then bringing in your counter assertions and your arguments. I think that when I talk to somebody, I have a good friend of mine. She's a cinematographer. I work with her, and she's adamant. She's like, "Why are we doing this when there's these other things that we should be doing?" And my answer with her is always rooted in, number one, understanding the fraction of which the cost of exploration is in comparison to the other sectors of government and the other sectors of running industry. Like, we think, my God, huge rocket, we can't do this, we need to do this. The reality is that doesn't solve. If we stop doing the program, it doesn't solve the other problems. So I think the economics of it are a really great angle. And the other angle I oftentimes take too is I think this is maybe the easier one, right? We go back to Velcro and a ballpoint pen, and you say, well, look at what comes out of things like Formula One racing and out of space programs and even warplane development. Like, look at the technologies that are discovered and brought forward and then integrated into daily life. That's kind of a normal go-to. But this is all more complicated now, because now we have, as they have called it, the billionaire space race. And it's gone away from the nationalistic or, typical conversation from the 60s, I think, to what we have now, which is it Bezos? Which, I mean, Blue Origin's not doing trips to the moon right now. But, the conversation of what is SLS versus Starship. And even the other day, there's Zach Gordon, who does a bunch of Starbase coverage, somebody had posted a picture from him saying, look at SLS. And he's like, hey, this is Starship. But how crazy is that now? We have two, beyond planetary capable launch systems for human rated flight coming up. That's crazy.
It is amazing. And, I guess, what is it, March 28th, March 31st? We're expected to hear something from the FAA about being able to actually launch Starship in a test flight. I mean,
it's going to be fascinating.
Then we have the race, who launches first, SLS or Starship?
Races are good for people, though, right? Like, we understand things. Okay, I keep on joking. So my documentary project is a 3 or 4 year project, and it's not going anywhere fast, literally, because it takes time, right? Like, you started this in 2019, and we're talking about the return in 2024. Maybe that slips. That's the nature of the industry. And I think that people, we're very accustomed to, our daily shock is when Comcast shows up 2 hours late for our appointment, and I think that the humankind, as we know it, is so used to an expediency that changes dramatically when it's not a Falcon 9 on the launch pad that explodes, but it's a human rated Falcon 9, right? Like, we're really, I feel like people are really accustomed to quick immediacy, and sending people safely so far beyond our reach is something that you don't do quickly unless you're Thales. And I don't know, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to me. Space race is fun.
Before we started recording, we started talking about this new job I got after 25 years of, being in like the computer internet software industry. Oldest son's graduated from college, youngest son's in college. If you're going to make a career change, now it's like, feels like nearing the last chance to reasonably expect to do such a thing. And so decided to go and, become a flight controller over at NASA. And the first thing that we're doing is going through this thing called boot camp, where they're literally walking through all the different aspects of NASA and the ISS and everything. And what really amazes me is how much planning goes into the smallest details.
Yeah.
And as I'm sitting here watching this, I'm thinking, how do you create self-sustaining cities other places? Just like the approach, it's like different.
That's a huge question, right? Because it is, it feels when we are so seemingly incapable of doing much here, it feels daunting to look at something somewhere else. But here you're there's no petri dish. We're kind of like, it's everything spread across the table. And when you have something that's so focused as like a colony or a base or ISS, I think that you gain the benefit of that kind of like honing in, zoning into the single thing that people rally, they rally around that. Like they rally into those moments and they rally into that singularity. It's hard. Like it's hard when you're dealing with your bills, your career, your family, your hopes and your aspirations and your failures, like comprehensively. It's easier when you take a single focus and then you're like, okay, those things are here, but this thing's the thing I'm doing. And I think ISS is a great example of that. Maybe right now, I mean, it's got to be interesting for you, because now we're talking about what happens to the ESA arm, right? Like, what if they detach? There's all these conversations we're having in the last 2 weeks, especially regarding ISS. You're seeing the media basically take a stab at a number of astronauts in space right now who are never going to leave one another behind, who are part of one tribe of humankind, but now it's being played out on a political spectrum, which is really unique.
It is. It's kind of interesting. NASA, I guess, has been really focused on just keeping the mission going and staying as far away from the geopolitical interplay that you see. But you don't quite see that from the head of Roscosmos.
No, but I don't think he's fighting with NASA. I think he has taken the fight against. I mean, Bezos is still, Blue Origin is still playing a role in all of this development, right? Like they're just sleepy right now. We don't hear much happening from New Glenn. But I think that the Musk versus Roscosmos like conversation, that's the dialogue that I see. And like NASA is like, unfortunately, like the byproduct of that conversation, because here we are in the American broomsticks, which, poor Tory Bruno and Elon and everybody else trying to make things. These are no broomsticks, man.
It's funny. It was trampolines before. Now it's broomsticks.
Right. That's where innovation happens. Like innovation doesn't happen because someone had the runway to just go and see what could happen. Like we kind of become complacent. And I think that our natural state is to find comfort. And innovation happens when somebody pushes against that. Like you, as you're talking about right now, make a career move. Why do that? Because something's driving you internally to ask yourself, can I be near the thing that I want to do? Or can I discover or see this from a different angle? And like that strain or that stress, that stressor, I mean, that's where good things happen. So in a way, I'm thankful for the trampoline and broomstick conversations, because if anything, it's going to push those BE4 engines along a little bit faster for old Tory Bruno.
I hope so. I think they're taking the step by step ferociously, but a little bit too much step by step.
Step by step is problematic, and that's one of the things that Burt Rutan was really against, and same with Buzz Aldrin during the first parts of the X Prize, was realizing that NASA is safe, and because NASA is safe, NASA can be slow. It has to be, because it's at the behest of the government. It's at the behest of the tax spender and payer. It's ultimately, it answers to a different set of parameters. So when people are critical of NASA, or they're critical of whatever it is for delays and for things like that, these are the same people who would be outraged and be crying for resignings and so forth if things didn't go perfect. So it's an impossible set of circumstances to control. and there's a little bit of freedom and fright that comes with the commercial industry. That's what started me looking at things. I wanted to know the difference in what I'm experiencing is I'm 36. Um, what am I experiencing now? And what did my grandfather experience? He was a little bit older than me at the time, but when he was watching the Saturns go through their runs, and what's the difference in the commercial versus the private? And sorry, the commercial versus the nationalized space programs. Um, and that fascinates me, right? Because now, it used to be cheering on go US and then go USSR. And now it's like, what's your favorite NASCAR? You know, it's a little bit different. And in that mix, people are forgetting about ULA and everybody else who, yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of people making really cool things. And behind the brand and behind the singularity of like a Jeff Bezos or a Musk, you've got people who are really smart and, incredibly talented at what they do. People like you who are training and redeveloping skill sets to care about what's up there. Because what's up there matters what's down here, you know? What's down here goes up there.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I guess, what was your first space memory?
My first space memory, it was the return to flight after Columbia. I mean, I remember other things, right? I remember disasters, because you remember disasters as a kid. They stand out in your brain because people are suffering in a public way, and you're like, that's an emotion. But I was at university, and for whatever reason, I had cued into C-SPAN or whoever was covering the first flight back after the disaster, and I watched it. I just watched the entire thing, and that qualifies to me as the first memory that really made me question things just a little bit more. Like, how does this work? Like, what are orbital mechanics? What do these different heights mean? And how does a thing stay in one place versus how many loops does it make? And why is it at an angle, right? Like, all those questions for understanding, like, those elements of what goes into not only getting off, the gravitational planet, the planet, but like into like normal functional orbits and stuff. Like, that's what it was. It was that moment. And because then I started looking at everything differently, like understanding GPS and looking at where did GPS come from, and how do that kind of spiral where you start to search backwards and forwards at the same time, and then you're hooked. And then you just start asking questions and wondering about things. I'd never seen my first rocket launch until this last summer. I kicked off my dock project. It's not done. There's no deck yet. It doesn't have funding, but I kicked. I lost you for a second. Sorry. I went down to Van Horn and started filming, and I watched that little first run of, was it NS-15? Was it the 15 that went up, and I had never heard a sonic boom in my life. I guess I've heard one in the past, but so that's probably the second defining memory. And then the third would be seeing Starbase for the first time. It's mind-boggling.
And so whenever you went to Van Horn, how close to the launch were you able to get?
We went up to the end of the highway blockage. Our focus really wasn't, so my project is long-term focusing on how Van Horn and Brownsville develop in analog to Canaveral. I want to look at how does the emergence of the private space industry develop in these two small ecosystems, which are very Texan, but as you know, very different. And how does it do? So our whole premise, our whole piece is going to look at those variables and then draw a comparison to how Canaveral developed in the 60s. And then, of course, you got Wallops now, which is going to develop in a different way. And then you've got everything else, right? From the Michigan launch site to all these different things. So I think that Van Horn, we were at the edge and, probably still within the 7 mile zone. No, we would have what? Maybe what was the actual block off there? It had to have been at least at least a couple miles from the actual launch tower. But it was really unique. I mean, we were hanging out with these families and these kids from Van Horn who watched a rocket go up. I mean, no one gets that. No one understands that. No one gets it. They're like, Van Horn, okay, whatever. It's Texas. It must be a big city. No, this is like, it's a 3,500 person town. That
I
kid.
didn't realize it had that many.
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess there's some stuff, there's some interesting things happening because of the change in demographics that, that interests me as a filmmaker, because what you're getting to ultimately, right, is the question of, do private companies bear the burden to help promote and develop public interest? And that's really where I'm looking at, is the perspective of whether or not Jeff Bezos owes Van Horn something, whether or not Elon Musk owes Brownsville. Everyone wants to say Boca Chica, but it's like Boca Chica, that was a weird community. It's really Brownsville and South Padre that benefit from the existence of a visible launch site. But also, it's all fun and games until there's a problem. And you look at the differences between the two areas and the potentials for negative impact. And then you start to understand why NASA is so particular, because you have to be.
And, Starbase, you also have the lovely potential of an international impact, being so close to Mexico.
I mean, and the reality is, you don't not take into consideration those calculations, right? Risk assessment's all about asking the what if. And whether you're doing contract analysis or you're insuring something, you're asking what if. And like, it's different when we're talking about what if you and I drive two cars very fast next to one another. When you're saying, what if you happen to just live here? And I mean, I'm gonna point fingers and look at the Chinese space program, and no one has a choice about whether or not they did or did not live in the potential ascent pattern, ascent pathway of a rocket. And so like when you see imagery of, fuselages falling and tetrazine coming out, and you have to ask yourself, is there a better way? And so you have to ask yourself the same thing too. Like why aren't they going to launch, explaining to people why orbital launches aren't happening from Van Horn is an easy explanation. And then you bring up Boca Chica, and you're like, okay, well, there's a really narrow window that you can fly through where you're least likely to hit people if something bad happens. And then you look at the development of, the Canaveral launch site, and how very intelligently they're already building another tower. It's smart.
Yeah, especially, we consider their human landing system for the moon, how many launches they'll have to launch in order to fuel it up.
Yeah, which is
them all.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, you go back to SLS. SLS is, unfortunately, gets more hate than I think it deserves. And it does represent a progression, but no one takes into account how long the progression took. Like, how many people know about Ares, let alone SLS? And I think that's a conversation that people barely remember and during the Obama administration. And like, I feel like that's something where SLS is it's got the worm logo on it, right? It's iconic. It's got member berries. And I think that the looking at it the way that it's being done now, this hybridization between the national and the commercial is unique. And people love to hate on everything, but the truth is, it's a fascinating time to be alive right now.
It is. Well, I guess, how old were you in 2000?
I would have been 15.
15. So you really grew up with the internet, pretty much. You probably don't remember a time. I guess I graduated from high school in '94, and the internet was just taking off then. We had the Netscape browser, Amazon was founded. at the beginning of the 1990s,
The book
email.
company.
Yeah,
The book company.
yeah, the book company, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And people are like, you should really sell out to Barnes and Nobles before they put you out of business.
Yeah. Right.
Some person at Harvard Business School actually suggested that directly to Jeff Bezos.
I feel like Bezos gets a lot of hate, and that comes with being anybody of interest and being rich. And I understand that, but I don't understand that, but I can comprehend it. But it is like, man, people, can you imagine a world where Amazon doesn't exist now? No. The practice can always get better. It's like going to the moon and then going back again. We can do it better the second time. Well, the second round.
Yeah. But, I feel like, in 1990, the idea of checking your email, buying stuff online, going online for information was a very obscure theoretical thing. And then by 2000, it was normal. Like,
Yeah,
would be
it was.
hard not to do it.
I remember at Y2K, I was playing Worms at midnight because that's a thing that, the world was worried about banks flipping over and everything melting down because of a coding issue. And I remember playing Worms in Defiance and being like, yeah, I'm on the internet right now. If it happens, I'm here for it as a 15-year-old.
But I feel like the 2020s are going to be the same for space. That, right now, people can kind of look at space travel as being kind of like obscure thing, like the economy extending out into the moon and beyond as being kind of like a very, yeah, someday. But I think by 2030, a lot of views have changed from being skeptical to being, of course, it worked out that way type of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. I think that, one of the biggest differences too is that this generation coming up, like my son's 13, both, and my other son's not, oh, he's 10 now, but both those kids watched Starhopper. They watched Happy Go Hoppin'. They sat and wondered why I was staring at a venting water tower. And they're seeing things differently now too. My kids, your kids, it's not, we used to go to the moon and now I think there's a space shuttle. It's like, it's accessibly in your face on the regular. And it's not just, hey, we're sending a little satellite beyond the solar system. It's like, no, like we're really, like, we're like, maybe you can get a pizza from New York in 25 minutes in LA. And they're crazy hypotheticals, but what version of the World Fair wasn't a hypothetical? Like, look at this amazing thing. We just don't have that. And it's the internet has kind of conglomerized all of that to where you have misinformation and information, you have the spectacular, you have the fake, and you have truth and lies and all these different things everywhere. And people have to discern for themselves. But the reality is, we stare at an ozone layer every day. And every time we see stars, and people dream and wish and see things. But now the idea of being able to fly to Houston and drive 6 hours, huge state, to go to Brownsville to touch a rocket. I mean, you could touch it. You could run up and touch one of the parked starships, or to go to, the rocket farms that exist around the areas around the country and see something. Like, there's more exposure. I took my kids to the one in Huntsville on the way back from the Gulf Shore, and to see them stare at a Saturn V, and to basically touch an F1 engine and be like, wow, this is huge. And to actualize that, if more kids felt and saw those things, there'd be a lot more, I think, excitement and appreciation for what goes into all of it, right? Air traffic control, development, HR, PR, all these different things.
Accounting.
Oh my goodness, accounting. That was the great thing, right? When you look back to like von Braun's plan for extending beyond Saturn and touching all the planets with a probe and really getting the development. And people are like, no, it'll cost too much. And then discovering that it was less than an accounting error in the entire ICBM program. You're like, hold on. I don't think people understand what space costs. And when I say that, I don't mean how expensive space is in the sense of development and maintenance and exploration and utility. I mean, in comparison to everything else. But I think that's also problematic by design, because maybe when you look at the people who have been traditionally making rockets, there's less of an incentive to be transparent about those elements. So when you have SpaceX, who isn't also vying for an Air Force contract to make 800 fighter jets, there's a difference in clarity about what things cost. And you see that with Falcon 9 and its reusability index, And so I think that the economics, like, people get money. People get when their gas goes up. People get when their gas goes down. When you can say reliably, hey, your internet that you couldn't get before because you only had DSN or DSL is now available, accessible, and costs this, and you can finally play Counter-Strike or something, and you're on a mountain in the middle of nowhere because of this one rocket that you've seen in the news and its ability to launch multiple times and put tiny little satellites all around the planet. Then they go, cool, so I have internet now. And then that's the start, right? Like that's how they go, oh, this exists because there are a number of satellites flying around. And I think for 4 to 5 people, to go back to our number, that's the most they're gonna care, but that's so much more than I think exists right now, maybe. And that leads to getting us off this planet. I don't want to escape here. I'm gonna die on this planet. That's the reality. But what are we if we're not doing? What are we if we're not exploring and seeing what's out there, right? Like the Magellan Complex. I want to go. People are going to do that regardless. The Mars Generation, fantastic series or film. Like, the kids exist now. The kids who are going to be touching other planets are alive. That's crazy. And
it's kind of funny. People say, why are you spending money on space and spacecraft and all this other stuff? But, putting an airport in the middle of the desert seems kind of crazy too. But then you see Las Vegas.
Vegas is an amazing conversation because it does. My wife and I are heading there, and she's never been, and we're heading there in about a month, and we're going up to Zion. But I'm excited to see her experience that for the first time. So she grew up west of Canaveral. So as a kid, hearing the shuttle was an annoyance to her. And I'm an arch baby, and I'm like, what's a shuttle sound like? It's perspective, it's hindsight. Are you from Houston originally?
I am.
Okay, so you're born and raised Texan.
It's true. I've developed an accent somehow, but I can't explain it.
You have a Midwestern accent. You have an accent like I do.
Well, I wish I could tell people the story. I'm from the Midwest. That definitely, because it's funny. You run into a neighbor, and it's not the first question, but maybe like the 5th or 6th. So where are you from? And like, from here, and like the response, the response to response is basically equivalent to, well, if you don't want to tell me.
Right. You must be hiding something. That's what we do in Missouri, right? Is the show me state. And now show me what you really mean.
Yeah.
It is fascinating, right? Like just back to like the place, time. We have a company here that's got some imaging software and hardware on it's giving me what's the Curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Well, Perseverance is the latest one.
Thank you. There's companies across the entire country that you might not realize person X living in Cody, Wyoming, that company is doing something that connects to the thing that you hear about that you don't know about, that goes above you, that flies around at 26,000 miles an hour. Like, holy cow. The internet is changing all that. You're 100% right about that. And it is common state knowledge now. It's like, now, this is real. This exists. This is like normal. What's not normal is the amount of failure that used to happen, of catastrophe in that process. Now it's spectacular rather. Sorry. It's like, we looked at the destruction of the different Starship developmental things as neat because it felt safe and it felt purposeful. But, what's the classic story of the Redstone? There was a Redstone or whichever rocket it was in the pad, and the guy was going to run out and shoot it to blow it up because it wasn't venting. And they're like, no, don't do that. It was I forget the whole story. It was in How to Build a Spaceship, which is another great book about Peter Diamandis. And love that book, man. Fantastic stories.
But going back to Las Vegas, once you have a big enough colony of people any place in the solar system, that becomes a self-fulfilling reason for space travel. Like, we obviously need to have a way to travel in space. How else are we going to get to, New Houston on Mars, or whatever it's called?
I mean, that's the truth, right? Like, and that's no one, when you're rescuing somebody from a cave, you don't spend the first hour saying, how the hell they get there?
Yeah. Honestly, the commentary people do.
Oh, this is true, right? That's why you never read the commentary. But you once there's a problem, we solve. Like, and that's then yeah, you're right. No, people are always asking those questions, aren't they? But the truth, I think that I don't know, it's like COVID, right? Remember the first day where we felt that, oh, we're gonna lock down. My wife and I rode our bikes up to our local store. It's called Schnucks here. And we filled our backpacks full of beans and random things. We could have driven our car up there. We could have absolutely driven our car up there and just gone grocery shopping like normal. But we were like, well, we better see what we can do. He's like, well, what if we can't drive? What do we have to do this? And like, our brains start immediately trying to find solutions to potential problems. So once you have a population living somewhere, what are you going to do? Drown them out? No way. You got to keep it going.
Yeah, it becomes self-fulfilling. I mean, it's like any human activity. I mean, professional sports,
Yeah.
Once you get enough people going, yay, it's so fun, exciting.
Right. And then you celebrate the Cubs losing for like 103 years. Or the Houston, I don't bring up the Astros. I can't bring up the Astros being from St. Louis. But it is interesting. I think that I was thinking this morning about what you're doing and about the conversations you're having, and the fact that the multitude of them in combination makes for a very interesting documentary in itself, right? Because you got two factors of change. You have your change, who you are, and how you evolve through all these different dialogues. And you have the perspectives of a really varied group of people, right? I'm guessing a mixture of scientists, industrious people, and normal people, and family, and friends, and random people. And you, more than any of us, frankly, probably have one of the most unique perspectives right now. You're talking to a director in a car. It's I think what you're doing is actually something very important. I think what you're doing, as it relates to Artemis and beyond, is kind of like the journalism you see in the Dust Bowl era, right? Like slice of life, human existence stuff. Because I think that behind all of this, it's really not about space for any of us. It's about humans and like human contact and excitement and shared interest. And the same thing might exist about boats. But well, maybe not now after Ever Given and Ever Forward. But it's very cool. I'm very impressed. I'm impressed by I know the challenge of scoping interviews. You've done a lot. How many have you done?
Well, I started counting down to the end of 2024 at 1840 days. And I think today is like, let's see. So this is 1019. So basically like 821, right? I think.
It's amazing, dude.
And
I mean,
I have 1,018 more to go.
so for your sake, I'm gonna hope they get ahead of schedule.
Well, the countdown's always been specifically to the end of 2024, come what may.
Oh,
So
beautiful.
so I got a good cap there.
You got to give yourself a nice capped tenure, otherwise you've got perpetuity on your hands.
Exactly. Could you imagine how crazy it'd be, like 2035 and they still haven't sent anybody? You know, it'd be like, please free me. You know?
Unrelated to, well, very related to what you're doing, but as you hit the back end process, which you really should start sooner than later. You have my email. Holler if you need anything. If you're looking for like archivists or things like that, because what you're going to have on your hand is a documentary information, right? And I don't know what your overall plan is for the thing, but when it comes to things like transcribing, or doing even like very simple like audio transcriptions from like rev.com and stuff like that, there's a lot of ways to get investigative with your process. And I think that I think you're poised. I think you're poised with these conversations to have a really unique vantage point. And it's something that I think that you might already have all this in your brain, but what I said before, what you're doing is important. And I think that what you've got is going to be really interesting and very eye-opening, and is about so much more than you know, a loop around the moon. There's some weird projects, man, that I've been on that have been Artemis related, and I can't say what they're for, but it's funny to think about the weird connectivity between things, you know, how little stories intersect and how stories kind of come through and around. Some of the people I've met in Boca Chica, and in Van Horn, and the stories that we're following, like, because of space and rockets, it's a connectivity that I wouldn't have had to people otherwise, you know. It's weird. It's why we're sitting here having a conversation about something I never would have met you if it wasn't for Twitter, let alone this, right? It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and you know, honestly, we probably wouldn't have met if it wasn't for COVID either. I would be still going up to people at Starbucks and you know, on the street.
It's the space guy again. It's the moon guy again.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel that way, man. When I done my framing sessions in Van Horn and Boca Chica, I didn't film for the first 5 days either place, because I didn't want, like, I wanted it to be clear to everybody who I'm meeting with that, like, we're not here for the immediacy. We weren't here for the first launch. We weren't here for the first hypothetical full stack. We're here because we want to know who you are, and we want to watch and see what happens in the next 2 years. And that's something that's, you know, I struggle with that, because you have to become very close to people, while also trying to have distance, you know. There's something beautiful about a one-off interview, because you can go, thank you, have a nice day.
Well, and you know, as a filmmaker, I'm sure you always think about your target audience. And for this project, my target audience hasn't even been born yet.
Oh my God, that's fascinating. I have not ever once in my life thought about that from that vantage point, from that perspective. That's nuts, dude. I'd never even thought about that. Because most of what I make is for the immediacy, right? Who's going to buy and create and do, and it's a spot, it's a 30-second. But what you're creating essentially becomes like a Library of Congress piece, right? Where, like, people look down the line, they go, oh yeah, this one guy made this one crazy set of things. And you can walk into this museum and here's 100 different rooms with 100 different conversations happening, you know? I mean, the reality is, right, from a time capsule perspective, let's say that the hypothetical asteroid hits us, and, you know, 1,000 years from now, society's rediscovered or reemerges. Like, this is the Hammurabi code kind of thing, where, like, it's like it's written in sand. It's written in this reality of the interviews that you've created. Because I don't believe that for a second that NASA is doing this right now. I don't think that any of the grant programs that they have for filmmaking have taken an approach to Artemis like this. Like, I think the approach that NASA's going to take is going to be very much focused on, here's the rocket, let it roll out, here's the stories of some of the creators along the way, and then of course the different vendors like Cisco and stuff who are going to make their own little pieces and say, we did rocket stuff. But this is a conversation with everyday slice of life people who do or don't care. And I'm sure you've had a couple I don't cares.
Oh, a lot. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to get them online. It's just because response rate.
It's true. I unfortunately have to end our interview.
Oh, no worries, John. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, I'll send you my treatment too, just to have you at a glance. But you're, whatever we can do, like, just to help, as a fellow maker of things, in the realm of weird conversations about space, I'm happy to be a part of this process with you, and I'm happy to offer whatever you're ever looking for. I got plenty of other random friends who you can interview, and I'm happy to throw them your way.
Oh, I need them, please.
All right. I'll get you a list. I'll put a guilt list together and just send an email out. Happy to do that.
I appreciate it. Well, you have a good day.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
See ya.